Welcome to Reputation Nation, the podcast that goes beyond the headlines to unpack corporate crises, legal battles, and the strategies that shape reputations. I'm Anne-Marie Malika, the CEO of Desenhall Resources and crisis management expert.
And I'm Stacey Bratcher, a lawyer who's battled crises on the front page and in the courtroom. And sometimes those crises have led me into the foxhole with Anne-Marie. Whether you're in the C-suite, the legal department, or are just curious about controversy, we've got you covered. Let's get started. Before we get started, it's important to note that neither of us is actively working on any of the cases that we discuss in the Reputation Nation, and therefore we don't know all of the meticulous details and twists and turns of these matters. While we have extensive communications and legal experience that shape our commentary and give us a unique perspective that we want to share and hope that you'll enjoy, we may not cover every aspect of each case, and our insights should not be taken as legal advice or the final word. We're here to start the conversation, not settle it. Politicians, publishers, and the public are all taking a harder line on AI this week, making it very clear that guardrails and governance can't be an afterthought. The New York Times filed another copyright lawsuit against a new AI model. The Washington Post's new AI podcast is distorting its own content. State attorneys general are signaling they're ready to treat delusional chatbots as a consumer protection problem. And CNN is reporting that audiences are tired of AI slop. All this and more on Reputation Nation. The New York Times sues AI startup Perplexity over use of copyrighted work. This feels like an OpenAI redo. Last week, the New York Times sued Perplexity AI, accusing the startup of illegally copying and republishing its journalism to power the AI answer engine without payment or license. This is very similar to what's happening in the OpenAI case. New York Times claims that Perplexity scraped millions of articles, including their paywalled content, ignored technical blocks, and then produced answers that are identical or very close to the Times stories. So the lawsuit is challenging trademark violations, saying that Perplexity Systems fabricates or hallucinates information and misleads users. So this is going to be very interesting, Anne-Marie, to see how this case follows along with the OpenAI lawsuit. Seems very, very similar to me.
I didn't have time to go back and read the specifics of the OpenAI case with New York Times, but I'm wondering if they added the hallucinates piece to this case, because I don't recall that being as front and center in what we discussed on the OpenAI New York Times case. Yeah. And I think we're going to start to see more of that because, first of all, if you look a year ago, nobody talked about hallucinations in the context of AI. And now I'd say in the last 3 or 4 months, it's been all over the place. And we're seeing it. We're experiencing it in everyday life.
If you use somebody's trademark, copyrighted material without a license and you misuse it, you are then damaging the brand of the creator. So that's a very interesting angle. And, you know, as you said, we're all aware of hallucinations and that AI isn't perfect. This is a really interesting spin on how that could be legal liability for those developers.
The hallucinations too are not always replicable. I think that's one of the things that would be really interesting to watch, and something that we've seen with client issues. If you put in, you know, what's happening in this piece of the energy industry right now, give me the state of play. With one prompt, it will say one thing, and with another prompt that's just barely different, it will say something entirely different, and you don't necessarily get the same thing every time. So the hallucinations are not consistent, and the hallucinations also can compound on each other. I think the number of times I've searched something in AI and I've known the answer and what's come back has been patently false is still pretty shocking. You know, it's garnering all this information constantly, but it's still getting a lot wrong. And if that becomes a part of these lawsuits in the copyright and the trademark infringement, I think that's almost a secondary industry we're going to see in terms of how suits play. And if I'm a company that there's false information out there, hallucinations on an LLM, do I take action?
This is a really interesting thread. And I would say, if I'm thinking back on the New York Times OpenAI case, that discovery order where the judge is requiring OpenAI to produce all their chats, that is a great relevance argument, because if, as you're saying, the each prompt is different and gets a different result, you as a lawyer, what you would want to show is that that is leading to brand damage, that you are, the infringement is damaging my company. And so if the lack of a consistent answer, depending on the prompt, makes that discovery request very relevant, which is the sort of a baseline of when the judge is going to order discovery or not. So I think that's really interesting because, as we talked about in an earlier episode, that discovery order could break the whole case. And I'm wondering if New York Times learned from the first go round in bringing this case against Perplexity that that is really a soft spot, and maybe we're going to see a license. Maybe we're going to see some guardrails or tech modifications to make the tools more consistent. I don't know. I'm just very fascinated by it.
I mean, even if we see the licenses happen, I think the point you raise on the tech modifications and what it takes to do that would be interesting. I also have to imagine that the e-discovery companies that are sort of doing this forensic investigation are going to have to spend a heck of a lot of time going in and trying to recreate multiple hallucinations over and over again with different information. And that to me is fascinating. I don't want to be on the front lines of the keyboard warriors of that, but I want to know how it turns out, because in the influence world, if you are trying to influence the outcome of a piece of litigation or to get a member of Congress or a committee to act in a certain way or understand the basis of this information in a specific lens, that is both a huge risk and a huge opportunity depending on how it can be used.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's another opportunity when you talk about the e-discovery vendors, to the extent that they're able to develop any kind of tools or pattern recognition to find the cause of inconsistencies. We are just on the bleeding edge of crisis and litigation management for these AI tools.
Entirely. Our digital impact team that runs our Siren 360 digital defense program has been starting to analyze how we can see what certain prompts are bringing certain information and can you change them. So by putting certain information into a New York Times article, does that impact the LLM? If you get a quote from a CEO on a owned channel from a company, does that impact the LLM? Like, where are the levers that actually make a difference if that's the way people are going to receive information? It's a lot of work, and it's really interesting work, and it will be, I'm sure, something that we continue to do, but it's really important to how people want to get information out there and where you spend your time and energy. Marketing dollars are not infinite. Lobbying dollars are not infinite. And if you need to get information to certain audiences, how do you do that if most people are getting their information from LLMs? There's a gentleman I follow on LinkedIn, a PR firm, I think it's called Spark PR. They do traditional and tech PR. They put together a how to write a LLM optimized press release. Now
Brilliant.
The press release is a often frowned upon tactic in the traditional PR world, but it is also one of those things that often gets information farthest, fastest, widest. And I think using the framework to then pull through to how LLMs are pulling information, how that might get CEOs opportunities to have follow-on media or people to find information about key companies or key products, particularly in the B2B space. I think that's really fascinating.
Can I ask you just to learn a little bit more about, because you said press releases are frowned upon. Is it sort of like it's too pedestrian, it's like basic?
It's a little bit of a box check. It's not particularly creative. The nice thing about a press release, like when you do
It's like the official.
yeah,
Right?
when you do advertising, it's owned, so you have full command and control of what it is. But, if you see something that goes over the news wires where press releases generally go, like when you know something is AI content, you have a little...
You discount it a little
You do.
bit.
You discount it because it's coming straight from the company. Now, I think putting out statements can be really effective, and we've seen a lot of companies move away from the quote traditional press release to I'm a CEO of a company and I am essentially using my LinkedIn channel or the blog on my website or my Twitter account as my primary source to deliver information, and they're putting out official statements that way. Press releases are not bad, but the idea that they're going to solve everything or it's this sort of one and done, take that as doctrine and you don't need to do anymore, is the piece that I think PR practitioners generally are not thrilled about. It's synonymous with the PR that concept. It will just PR that. That's not how it works.
So can I ask on on the AI front, when you were saying that your Siren team sort of thinks strategically about those things, do bots then give more credibility to something that comes from the company? Is that what they're saying? Like, because it's not a Reddit comment or something like that, it's weighted differently, or
That's what we're trying to figure out. I don't
okay.
honestly have a clear answer for you because the algorithms are changing based on the amount of information that's being input constantly. So some of the questions that we're asking and diving into is how much is it based on volume versus how much is it based on a weighting of the source
Well,
versus how much is it based on, for example, if it's the CEO making a statement versus a company spokesperson, is that treated
is that
differently?
different?
Or if you are a CEO that goes and does a Forbes talk and you say the same thing at the Forbes talk that you do at a, run-of-the-mill local interview, does one end up rising more than the other or becoming more useful or getting more legs or being trafficked in more places? And also, does it take repetition? So in media training, when you were doing broadcast interviews, you used to say repetition works. I still think that's true, but how we think about repetition now is based on SEO, which I feel like SEO is like a thing of 10 years ago now, but how often things get picked up in search algorithms. And now it's sort of the same thing. So do I have to say the exact same thing 100 different ways for LLMs to pick it up? Or is it better that I say something similar that makes it seem like there's multiple sources saying something kind of alike, but not exactly the same?
So that's what your team's trying to figure out.
I don't think it's ever going to be a code that's fully cracked because just like search, it's always going
Probably
to be
going to
changing.
evolve.
Yeah, but having a better understanding so that we can counsel our clients and our own efforts to understand, well, it makes a lot more sense if we're trying to target this type of person or this issue or these outcomes, that if we do these inputs, we'll get there faster or with more certainty. Semaphore had a really interesting headline recently. Washington Post's AI generated podcast rife with errors and fictional quotes. So Semaphore is a publication that was started by a number of journalists a handful of years ago, and they report that the Washington Post's new AI generated personalized podcasts that launched very recently are riddled with factual errors. There's things that are completely invented or misattributed quotes, misleading commentary that ironically distorts the paper's own reporting. So it's pulling things that were sourced by the Washington Post not accurately. It's certainly prompting some concern and alarm within Washington Post newsrooms, but likely also the newsrooms of others. In this particular article, senior editors from the Washington Post called the mistakes incredibly frustrating, and some of the staff demanded that the tool be pulled immediately, warning that using this type of AI technology without sufficient human oversight undermines editorial quality. I think this perfectly encompasses the tension in newsrooms between the editorial staff and product teams and between business teams and journalists. Washington Post is trying to find more subscribers, find more listeners, have probably a younger or more different, diverse audience in their subscriber base. And I'm guessing podcasts were a big part of that potential push. I think they're probably rethinking that based on what's just happened.
Well, let me ask you the question I ask you all the time, which is there ever such thing as bad press? Because as you said, they're trying to grow the audience, and now they have something that undermines the quality and integrity of the work, but they're in the conversation because every news outlet has their own podcast, right? Where podcast is the new trusted form of media. So is there ever such thing as bad press?
Like I always say, it depends. In this case, I think the challenge is that legacy media is taking a beating from so many different angles. The idea that the handful of newspapers and the regular broadcasts that happen with CBS, ABC, and NBC used to be trusted institutions of information, and they're not necessarily anymore. So I think when you see folks that are already skeptical of what they're getting from those outlets, and then something like this happens, it further erodes trust with their core user base. So I think you have to look at maybe their more legacy subscriber compared to who they're trying to go find next. And maybe they're okay with that. Maybe that is something that they're hedging their bets on and they feel fine about it. I'm sure the business team has looked at all the demographics and all the back end metrics of what they're looking for. But if I'm a Washington Post subscriber that's had a subscription for 20 years and I decide to cancel that because of this, I think that's problematic. Now, do I think they abandon AI podcasting entirely? Absolutely not. I think what they're going to need to do is go hone how they use it and probably rely more on editorial oversight than just a tech product that they can throw out without hands on the keyboard.
I'm not familiar with their podcast. I haven't listened to them. I haven't really researched that. But if there was an error in a print media story, the paper would issue a correction. Is that something they would do just based on your media experience? Is that something that they should be doing if their bot generated content that's also on a national channel does?
It's a great question. The how they do that, I think, is going to be different in podcasts. So if you seek a correction from a print story, whether that's actually printed in a paper that you touch with your hands or if it's a digital version, there's usually something at the very end that says what the correction was and identifies it. In a podcast, do you go back and change the audio? And do you have to make note that you change the audio? Do you put a disclaimer at the front that says there's corrections at timestamp XYZ? I'm not sure what that looks like. And I think that's going to be something that we as listeners and producers of podcasts are going to have to think about. And I think you probably will see more disclaimers as a entry point to that, because if they say we can't guarantee the authenticity or veracity of this information we're putting out.
Why am I listening then, by the way?
That's exactly it.
I mean, unless it's some sort of a comedy or entertainment show. Like I listen to a couple news podcasts and I'm doing that because I want information.
Right.
Right. I'm not wanting to see like, oh, what did the bot come up with? You know, I want to be in a conversation and say something totally wrong.
Right. I listen to NPR and The Daily for very different reasons than I listen to the Real Housewives gossip podcast. I'm not expecting to get breaking news on that front. Or if it's breaking news, it's definitely hearsay and likely would not stand up in a court of law. I think this is a very contentious an interesting place for us to be with media and AI. For me, I make sense why I'm seeing more and more consumers of news go to Substacks that are run by a journalist or two that they trust, even though those publications are typically taking some sort of advertiser dollars. They're vetting their advertisers in a way that's very different than just the highest bidder on the Washington Post or the New York Times. I think you generally feel some sort of sense of authenticity and that the person that's putting it out wants to put out a good product, as opposed to it being the lowest common denominator of just getting the news out. The entire media landscape has changed entirely in the last 10 years for 1,000 different reasons. And I think we're going to see it completely flip on its head again in the next 2 years because of AI.
Let me ask, like, if you were representing a, legacy media brand with an issue like this, how do you reboot? I know it's just their podcast and they still have their, larger news organization, but how would you help them reboot this?
It really depends on what their objective is. And that to me is the thing that's most unclear. I don't know what they're after outside of revenue dollars, which it seems to be their primary goal at the moment, is to make sure that the paper is in the black versus the red. And if that's the case, then you just want more eyes and more ears on things sort of at all costs. I don't know that the authenticity and trust piece is as important to the business and the product side of the publication as it is to the editorial side. And that's, something that is a standard challenge that exists. It's a tension that has always existed in newsrooms. You've got journalists that feel like they have ethics most of the time and a mission to put out factual information and do the best reporting. Not all journalists feel that way. So just asterisks to that, everyone, if you hear that. But most of the journalists I've had the privilege to work with do, and they want to put out good information. And if they're being sort of pushed to just do the least to get it out the fastest, I think that becomes a challenge. And you've seen it, what the consequences of that are in newsrooms. You've seen a lot of really trusted reporters and editors leave. And I think the entire generation of a career journalist is shifting.
Yeah, different. All right. Well, hey, let's switch to some collaborative action by more than 40 state attorneys general. This comes from Reuters. Big tech warned over AI delusional outputs by US attorneys general. So these are, 40 states, so red and blue states. A bipartisan coalition came together to send a public letter to 13 major tech companies, including Microsoft, Meta, Google, Apple, OpenAI, and Anthropic, warning that AI chatbots' delusional responses can encourage users' false beliefs and even contribute to self-harm, potentially violating state consumer protection and criminal laws. So, there's unfortunately a lot of sad stories out there about kids in particular who engage with AI chatbots. I think Des Reeves did a story about a teddy bear that was sending some inappropriate
Right.
messages to kids. So this is a larger, I would say, public health sort of angle on what's happening with AI. And as I said, I think the fact that it is a broad bipartisan effort, I think, is something that folks should pay attention to because, as we know, the political folks don't agree on a lot these days. And so that you have 40 of them coming together asking the tech companies to pay attention to this, I think is really a meaningful development.
Consumer protection in a lot of ways has been politicized over the years of do you like a company, do you not like a company? Are they a big company versus a small company? But I think when it comes to consumer protection and children, there's generally more consensus than there is division. And these chatbots are encouraging kids to commit crimes, potentially explore pharmaceuticals, to get into illicit drugs. They're offering unlicensed mental health advice. They're supposed to be these tools for information, and rather than being even a tool for comfort, it's creating really unhealthy chaos that's often uninterrupted or unmanaged by the adults in these kids' life. And that's not a knock on their parents or their teachers. Kids are always going to do the thing that they're not supposed to do. But if it's happening constantly and you're really only hearing these negative ideas or negative thoughts, that's very difficult to combat and very scary.
Yeah. Yeah. So that I think that's going to be very interesting, especially because we have no nationwide regulation of AI tools. Everything's sort of federated at this point. So very interesting.
Yeah, and the criminality of that is going to be something to watch too, because I'm sure there are adults that are using AI for information related to how to commit crimes. I mean, I've watched enough Dateline over the years to know that your Google searches always come back to haunt you. Obviously, all of this data is stored somewhere, but that's going to be something that will be just interesting. I hate to use that word. I'm not sure that there's a better one. Really curious to see how that starts to be used in defenses or how courts treat that, because could it be an innocent question that you're just asking, or could you be getting information to do something that you shouldn't be?
Yeah, well, and as we know, courts are a little bit behind on the tech front. So that's why, again, I maybe say this too often, but I really do think that New York Times OpenAI case is a real beachhead for what's going to be happening in the rest of this field.
If
So
there's two things we can count on in life, it's that the courts and Congress are behind what's happening and in social movements. And I think that the challenges are going to get worse and there's going to be more things that come to light before we see any sort of comprehensive legislation or even precedent setting rulings. Because let's say there is a ruling in the New York Times OpenAI case tomorrow, that's still going to get appealed and there's going to be back and forths. And, that's not going to be settled science, if you will, for quite some time. And by the time it is, how the technology works will be entirely different.
yeah.
CNN is out with a story why 2026 could be the year of anti-AI marketing. With all of this AI generated content and technology, folks are calling it slop, and it's become nearly inescapable online and in everyday media. And AI is eroding people's ability to trust what they see and hear. In response, brands and creators are experimenting with 100% human marketing campaigns, no AI newsroom policies, and even on screen labels like made by humans, betting that authenticity, accountability, and human craft and brain power will become a premium in the world that's saturated by synthetic AI driven content. This
I
is
think this
fascinating to me, and I kind of love it.
I kind of love it too. I think it's restoring a little bit of my faith in humanity that we actually care what each other think versus what a bot has generated for us. And I see this, I'm a Gen X type person. And so but I am seeing with younger generations that even, the Z generation wants the real thing, that they sort of turn away or discount anything that does not seem like it was made by people. So I like that.
We millennials and Gen Xers have a just extreme desire for nostalgia these days. I mean, the 90s fashion's back, 90s music is coming back. All these things that we've longed for of simpler times, which were really pre-technology days. I think younger generations are starting to see there is some value in going outside and not looking at a screen all the time, or not just being inundated with somebody else's ideas and having to think for yourself. As an older human and an employer, that I think is critical, because critical thinking skills are never going to go out of fashion.
Yeah, I agree. It's going to be really interesting to see where this takes us in the new year, because there is power in efficiency and scalability using tools like these. But as you said, the kids want something a little more real.
There's a lot of people talking about how AI is going to kill the advertising agency. And if things like this movement of no, we want authentic, human-centered content are true, I disagree with those saying that AI is going to completely take over marketing and advertising. I'm sure that it will build efficiencies like it will everywhere. But I mean, we looked at the case of Shein a few weeks ago, and people see their product photos and they know it's AI because the noses are off, or somebody's chin is slightly askewed, or they're using the pictures of folks that they shouldn't be because of what AI is generating for them. It has a role, but I do think, to your point about younger generations sort of dismissing it, as I think we're going to see more and more of that. And if that's the case, then do we move towards content that people feel is authentic, and how do you show people that it is authentic versus tell them? Because there's going to have to be a feeling. It's more of an intangible than, believe me, saying that this is 100% human.
Yeah. Maybe you just know it when you see it.
Yeah. Stacey and I want to wish everyone in the Reputation Nation a very happy holidays. Thanks for listening along with us this year. We've had a great time doing the podcast, and we look forward to seeing you in 2026.
That's it for this episode of Reputation Nation. Thanks for joining us. We hope you found this episode useful. Have a crisis you want to dissect on a future episode? Connect with us on LinkedIn or email us at repnat@dezenhall.com.
Want to learn more about navigating a corporate crisis or high-stakes lawfare situation? Or want more hot takes from us? Subscribe to Des Reads and Our Take at dezenhall.com. And be sure to check out Stacey's The Legal Department podcast for more legal insights at legaldepartmentpod.com. Thanks for listening. See you next time in the Reputation Nation.